Trauma and even emotions are often described as being stored in the body. But this is a shorthand phrase or a colloquial term. It's somewhat of a metaphor because emotions are not stored in the body and there is no backlog. In fact, suppressing an emotion does not place it somewhere inside us, waiting to be released years later through somatic work or allowing. What is happening is that the neurobiological and chemical processes that could happen simply take a different course, a course that is less healthy to our mind, brain, and body. Someone without a trauma-related sensitized nervous system may feel an emotion such as guilt. Notice the sensations it creates, recognize that they need to apologize, take the appropriate action, and then move on. For someone with trauma who has a sensitized nervous system, the same emotion may carry much higher stakes. They may interpret the guilt as evidence that they are bad, unsafe, or about to be punished. They may also be afraid of the actual physical sensations of guilt as they manifest in their body. The point is that no emotion can be stored, but the neurobiological and chemical processes in a traumatized mind will intensify and extend the process when it does occur. Put simply, rather than allowing emotions such as guilt, shame, or sadness to rise and fall, and responding appropriately to what they are communicating, we may become afraid of them, add threatening meaning to them, and repeatedly mobilize the body into fight, flight, freeze, or shut down. Trauma is therefore not a backlog of old emotions, such as shame, guilt, or fear, waiting to be discharged. It's an ongoing sense of danger that repeatedly generates new threat predictions and consequently new fear responses in the present. Stay with me as we look at what is actually happening across the mind, brain, and body. There is some science involved, but I will explain it as simply and as clearly as I can. But I'll need you to stay with me through the whole video for everything to fall into place. And understanding this process, well, it can remove a great deal of fear and make the path to healing feel really much clearer and a whole lot more simple. So let's start with what should happen and build up the layers of trauma as we go. So throughout the day, your brain is constantly anticipating what your body may need next and directing its resources accordingly. These resources include all sorts of things from oxygen, glucose, water, and salt, as well as activity across the hormonal, cardiovascular, digestive, and immune systems, to name just a few. For example, after a meal, more energy and blood flow are directed towards digestion. If you climb a flight of stairs, resources are redirected towards your heart, lungs, and muscles. And when the activity is over, the brain adjusts the body to whatever it now needs. This movement of resources is really normal. The body does not need every system working at maximum capacity at the same time. The brain continuously prioritizes whatever seems most important in that moment. Now, sometimes the brain prepares the body for a demand that never arrives. Imagine noticing your manager walking towards your desk. You suddenly remember that you have not submitted a report that should already have been completed. Before you know why they are approaching, your brain predicts that they may be coming to question or criticize you. You feel guilt rising inside, along with the physical sensations that accompany it. A sinking feeling in your stomach, heat in your face, tension in your chest, and perhaps an urge to avoid eye contact. Your alertness increases, your muscles tense, your heart may beat faster, and much more energy is made available to deal with the anticipated conversation. Then your manager asks whether you'd like a cup of tea. The brain now receives information that does not match its prediction. A cup of tea. Okay, so what we have is a prediction error, which means that the anticipated criticism did not happen. The mind recognizes the error. The guilt and physical activation begin to settle, and attention returns to the present situation. After you've had your cup of tea, you may decide to take action and get the report written up and submitted quickly. But the emotional response doesn't remain active once the immediate prediction of criticism has been corrected. So the preparation was real, but it was greater than the situation required. These brief miscalculations are a really normal part of life, and they use up a fair amount of energy and resources. But with adequate sleep, healthy food and hydration, and some recovery time, the body restores the resources it used and continues regulating itself normally. Now, let's level up. Imagine living in an environment where the prediction is regularly not an error, but it's accurate. So perhaps you live with an alcoholic parent or partner whose behaviour is very unpredictable. At times they may be calm, but at other times they may become angry, critical, frightening, or just simply unavailable. Because you can't reliably predict what will happen next, your mind and brain begin to expect difficulty. And it's because they want to keep you ahead of the curve in this type of situation. They want you to be ready and prepared. So your brain repeatedly predicts that the body may need extra energy to protect you. It increases alertness, prepares the muscles for action, and changes heart rate, breathing, digestion, hormones, and immune activity. There's a lot that's going on. But these responses are not necessarily mistakes in this situation. They could be considered understandable and useful adaptations to an environment that is unpredictable or unsafe. You may also begin to closely monitor the person's mood, tone of voice, footsteps, facial expressions, or even the way they enter the room. And this is hypervigilance. Now, at this stage, it is not an irrational response. It helps you detect changes quickly, anticipate danger, and prepare yourself for what might happen next. And the fear you feel is also relevant to the present. Your mind and brain are detecting or anticipating a current threat, and the body is producing a fear response to help you deal with it. The physical sensations of fear, such as a racing heart, tight chest, and tense muscles, then send further information back to the brain. Because lack of safety is genuine in this instance, these sensations are supporting the prediction that you need to remain alert, helping to keep the threat response active. And by the way, this doesn't always look like constant anxiety or visible fight or flight energy. There will also be periods of exhaustion, withdrawal, low mood, or even shutdown. After repeatedly mobilizing for danger, the system may reduce activity in an attempt to conserve resources. It may also become difficult to enjoy ordinary pleasures. When you don't feel safe enough to relax or don't have enough available energy, it can feel harder to feel interested, playful, connected, or fully present. Activities that might normally feel rewarding can seem overwhelming and require much more energy than you have available. So over time, this repeated mobilization and then shutdown place the mind, brain, and body under increasing strain. Sleeping and eating may become disrupted. Concentration may suffer, and stress-related and immune processes may become poorly regulated. Inflammation is normally part of the body's healing and defense system. But when stress continues for long periods, inflammatory activity may become more persistent or less well regulated. And this can really contribute to fatigue, pain, poor concentration, and a general sense of feeling really unwell. The difficulty is that the body is being prepared for danger again and again, and with too little time to recover. The body's resources are repeatedly directed towards protection, while digestion, sleep, restoration, repair, and other longer-term processes may receive less support. A cycle can then develop. The person feels exhausted or physically unwell, making it harder to move, sleep, eat well, or care for themselves. This creates further strain, while the mind and brain must continue anticipating the next genuine difficulty. So when trauma first develops within a prolonged, unsafe environment, the whole mind, brain, body system gradually becomes organized around detecting, anticipating, and surviving danger. Now, Now let's try to imagine that you are no longer living with the alcoholic parent or partner. Your current environment may be much safer, but the mind and brain and body have spent years learning that danger can appear suddenly and without warning. It continues using past trauma data or information to anticipate what might happen next, to stay one step ahead and get in front of any impending danger or lack of safety or abandonment. So the adaptation is now maladaptation. And remember, the brain is wonderful, but it's not infallible, and it does have many limitations. So as it continues to predict danger and in turn generate the threat response in the body, you feel these sensations as they manifest inside and view them as validating the original prediction. We now appear to have a form of confirmation. But the painful sensations of fear or shame or guilt don't prove that the prediction is true, even though it really feels that way. They're just the physical result of the threat response that the prediction itself has generated. The same is true of our thoughts. A fearful thought can appear to be truthful. Any thought can appear to be truthful, certain and full of authority, but that doesn't make it so. Both the thought and the bodily sensations or emotions can feel like more evidence, when they may actually be products of the same mistaken prediction of danger. Again, we see the consequences of a sensitized nervous system looping with a hypervigilant mind. A fearful thought predicts danger. The brain prepares the body for threat. The body produces powerful and uncomfortable sensations or emotions, and these emotions or sensations seem to confirm that the danger is real. The mind becomes afraid of the sensations and adds further threatening meaning and thoughts. The meaning generates another prediction of danger and escalates or maintains the current threat response. Because this cycle can happen repeatedly, even in really ordinary, daily, safe situations, the body is mobilized frequently and may not fully recover between responses. The whole system becomes less flexible and increasingly organized around protection. Even though the original environment hasn't changed, it's still safe. This is the transition from a sensitized nervous system and a hypervigilant mind in a genuinely unsafe environment to persistent hypervigilance with a sensitized nervous system operating in a very normal world of ups and downs, good times and bad times. Trauma is therefore not old fear or another type of emotion being stored inside the body, with a backlog developing as we age. The continuity comes from an ongoing expectation of danger or lack of safety in the present moment that repeatedly generates new fearful thoughts, new predictions, and new fear responses. And we could just as easily replace the word fear with shame or guilt or grief. So fear is not the only emotion that can be repeatedly generated with a sensitized nervous system and a hypervigilant mind, although fear is often closely linked with other emotions. Shame, guilt, grief, sadness, and others can follow the same basic process. A situation, a memory, or a thought may suggest something like, I've done something wrong. I'm not good enough. I'm going to be in such big trouble. I am all alone. I'll never get better. I'll always be sick. The brain responds to any of those thoughts, and we experience an emotion in the body. Shame, for example, may bring collapse or an urge to hide. Guilt may bring heaviness or a sinking feeling. And grief may bring exhaustion and hopelessness. Within a sensitized nervous system and a hypervigilant mind, these emotions feel far more than uncomfortable. They feel overwhelming and even really very dangerous. So the original emotion is then joined and enmeshed with a fear response because we are fearing that emotion. This makes the thoughts and sensations feel even more convincing and credible. And so a loop begins. The thought generates the emotion. The emotion and its sensations in the body appear to validate the thought. So what do? We engage further with the thought. So what happens then? The emotions become stronger. We continue engaging with the thought and the emotions stay or become stronger. And so it continues. This can create repeated experiences of shame, guilt, grief, and fear. But repetition is not the same as storage. What can, let's say the word persist, not store, but persist, is the subconscious programming in the mind. For example, I am not safe. And you can think about what is your subconscious programming, what is the script that it's running. Okay, so it could be something like, I am not safe. Now that belief keeps the brain hypervigilant, constantly trying to stay one step ahead of danger. Hypervigilance repeatedly activates the nervous system's threat response, keeping the body prepared for danger even when the present moment is safe. And that ongoing threat response manifests as ongoing symptoms such as anxiety or migraines. And in addition to acute symptoms, there's the chronic symptoms that also persist. And that's because after years of repeated threat action, the body may have had too little time for rest, digestion, restoration, and repair, increasing the risk of persistent pain, fatigue, and illness. This might be what people mean when they say that the body keeps the score, or that trauma is held in the body. But it's just part of the equation. The patterning persists across the mind, brain, and body, and the symptoms are regenerated each day as opposed to being stored. What also persists is a lack of understanding about what is happening across the mind, brain, and body. I separate these three things here to make the process easier to explain. But the mind, brain, and body are all part of one interconnected system. They all overlap each other. Now, healing begins by working with the patterns that persist in the mind, brain, and body. Using the input, process, output model that I have described in other videos, we can choose the most pertinent areas to focus our healing on. And it is true to say that healing will only occur by changing our perspective and then repeatedly changing our response. Repeatedly, consistently, sustained over a long, long old period of time. There is no shortcut. I've explained what happens and all of the detail, and that's still quite a simplified explanation. And the solution lies in everything I've just said. Sadly, not the stroking of a vagus nerve, nor the ingesting of a tablet or the tapping of the head. Healing lies in course correction. I've identified in this video what has become maladaptive. The solution right now may appear boring and impossible, but honestly, when it clicks, when it really, really clicks, the simplicity and the power and the empowerment becomes so exciting. So let's get to it. Here's a simple overview, and my other videos give you a lot more detail. So have a look around in the guidance playlist, and then from there you can go into the meditations that are really kind of more technical exercises than meditations. And I'd also just point out that the banner on top of my YouTube homepage just shows you the three areas. So before, when I said pertinent points to focus our healing on, the banner at the top of the channel shows the three areas that I think that we should focus on and the corresponding healing techniques that help us to course correct. But okay, here's a simple overview. A thought appears. Now that is an input. A thought is an input into our system. The brain interprets the thought and predicts danger, which causes the threat response. That is the process. So we have input, process. Now, the symptoms that are the consequences of the threat response, the consequences of a sensitized nervous system, well, we could call those symptoms the output. So there we have the input, process, output. Thought is an input. Threat response is the process. Symptom, such as a migraine, anxiety, is the output. What I'm saying is, if we can somehow cut this off at the input stage, then we have a really good chance of everything else falling apart and course correcting. But of course, the techniques that I'm about to show you, they sort of affect everything. But there is a focus on the input for me. So the number one key message is thoughts can appear with so much confidence and authority, but I promise you, so often they are not true. And that's not just in a traumatized mind. That's in the mind of a person who doesn't have trauma as well. They are just so often not true that it is incredible. Start to have a look yourself. Start to try to become more aware of your inner voice and just see how wrong and catastrophizing and crystal ball gazing your thoughts are. Okay, so if your thoughts are so often not true, the action here is to learn with practice and have a look at the meditations to disentangle from your thoughts and place yourself back in the present. And so when I say disentangle from thought, that is so possible. You might not believe it now, but really practice a little bit and then you'll start motoring forward and you'll see that you can disentangle from thought. You can get so good at it that you can be in the present where you have no thoughts and no sense of self. Now, this is where trauma recovery can lead to much more than healing. It can literally lead to contentment, to enlightenment, to peace. Let's bring all of that back to the manager. So imagine your manager walking towards your desk and the thought appears, I am in such big trouble. This guy is coming right at me. It may feel immediate and convincing, but it's still a prediction from a sensitized nervous system and a really tired and hypervigilant mind. So instead of automatically believing it and engaging with it and talking with it and revving it up and going through the gears, just pause, become aware and recognize that this thought feels true, but really it might not be. And then use the techniques that I teach in the meditations and that I give tips on in the guidance playlist to feel into your body, focus on your breath, and all of this really does help you to disengage from your thoughts. It sounds simple, or it might even sound complicated, but I promise you that it's very, very, very doable. Now, and this is all while your boss is approaching you, I might add. Everything that I've just said is entirely possible to practice and to fail and not be very good at, but still it's all possible to happen as he's approaching you. So work on disentangling from your thoughts and coming back to the present. Now, super duper key message number 2 is emotions and their sensations may be painful or uncomfortable, but they are not dangerous. And the action here is to allow the emotion with neutrality and no story attached. So try to remember when an emotion or a sensation that's related to nervous system sensitization is in your body, it can really feel very frightening and it can confirm what you're thinking. Or it can appear and then your mind will try to find an awful reason why it's there. When you become aware of this, you can literally be aware of your mind searching for a terrible reason why you feel this way. But our bodies are literally built to have emotions and for them to communicate to us either in pleasant ways or neutral ways, or maybe not neutral, or uncomfortable and painful ways. So there's nothing dangerous about it. An emotion itself is just a neurobiological and chemical experience in the body. And those neural connections, that chemistry, that biology, it's all native to our bodies. It's all there, it's already in our body, and it's just being used in a certain way. So nothing is toxic or from outside or is there that should be there or is creating a problem. In that moment in time, it just feels terrible. But if you can allow it to be there with neutrality and with no story attached, and again, do you see why the mind is so important to allowing? I keep saying allowing isn't just about the body. For us to allow, we have to feel safe. For us to allow, the mind has to be involved. The brain has to be taught that it doesn't need the threat response. So it's so loaded with requiring the mind and the brain to also be involved when we allow. But what I'm basically saying to you is the action here is to allow the emotion with neutrality and no story attached. So let's go at this example again. Your manager approaches, and in addition to disentangling from your thoughts, you do the following. So you might feel the guilt and the fear manifesting in your body as tension in the chest, heat in the face, a racing heart. Maybe you're even trembling and close to tears. But rather than resisting or leaning into and encouraging the sensations or attaching a story to them, just accept that, you've got a very tight mind, you've got a very sensitized nervous system, you're hypervigilant, and this is what happens. It feels awful, it feels painful, but just allow it to happen because it's not dangerous. And when you do that, you're not adding more inputs to the input process output. When you remove conversation with your thoughts and when you remove fear of your emotions and sensations, the inputs just start to stop. So the process, which is the threat response, will happen, and then it will have no further inputs. The loop will not loop, and the output will be a symptom such as maybe a headache for a short amount of time, but it will slough away. So the practice is simple. Disentangle from thought. Allow the emotion with neutrality and no story attached. Have a look at the banner, have a look at the playlists. Do you see how important the mind, the brain, and the body are in this system? People often talk about healing being in the body or being bottom up or top down. I'd advise you to forget about generalizations. I really try my best to not work in generalizations or metaphors. Sometimes I'll give you a metaphor, but I'm very clear that I'm using a metaphor to explain a neurobiological chemical process, and I show you how it works. But when people use loose language, it can be with such good intentions and, with such hard work, but we somehow can lose the actual neurobiology that is occurring. So now your manager asks whether you would like a cup of tea. What do? You say yes. And whilst you drink it, you are shaking with anxiety and trembling with fear, but it's okay because you know it is all the result of a hypervigilant mind and a sensitized nervous system. And with enough repetition, it becomes so obvious what's happening. You'll stop the patterns and the programs. You'll start to see that the thoughts are just so outlandish. You'll start to be able to feel the physical pain of fear, but you'll just know that it's fear, or you'll feel the physical pain of shame, and you'll just know it's shame moving around your body. The layers of suffering and catastrophe and crystal ball gazing won't layer themselves on top, which means that the threat response will be appropriate, short, and of a magnitude that is, required. And then the experience will move through the body and then fall away. And we won't be left with symptoms. We won't be left with ongoing periods of longer acute symptoms or chronic symptoms. Okay, we might get home sometimes from work with a banging headache, but in the evening, as we're aware of all of this and we start to let what we feel pass and not engage with our thoughts, the headache will just go. It won't turn into anything more than that. So, I want to thank you for listening. I know this might be a bit new and a bit different for some people, but, if you are close to throwing this information away, just have a think about it yourself before you do, because you can, in the next few moments, take a look at your thoughts. You can take a look at the quality of them. You can take a look at the content of them. You can decide how depressive, anxious, shameful, guilty they are. And you can notice whether you can disentangle from them or whether you feel compelled to engage. You can notice how often you are in the present with no thoughts and no sense of self. And then also, when you feel a strong emotion or a sensation such as anxiety or depression or complete numbness and dissociation, how do you respond to that emotion or sensation? Is it with a sense of neutrality, as you would with a cold, where you think, oh gosh, but it's no bigger than that? Or is it generating a fear response? So investigate, experiment, and take this thinking and apply it to yourself, even if it's for the next few minutes. And if what happens feels credible, then come back and have a look at the work in the channel, and let's see if we can get you healed. Okay. Thanks again for listening. If you wish to support the channel, have a look at joining the membership. And in the meantime, take such good care of yourself, and I shall see you on the next one.